because it wasn't just, we're going to focus on this, but it always has an underlying thing that the players usually aren't realizing that they're actually working on.
They don't see it.
While
Yes.
they're doing something else.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Volleyball 101. I'm Mari Silva, a full-time coach at NVVA, and today we're going to talk about practice planning. Whether you're a coach and like to hear some insights from our guest today, or an athlete who would like to understand why coaches do what they do throughout a volleyball season, you've come to the right place. Our guest today is George Mason's head volleyball coach, Aylene Ilkson. As a player, Coach Ilkson was a 4-year starter at Springfield College, leading her team to a 108-31 record. Ilkson started her college coaching career in 2010 and has been the head coach for the women's volleyball team at George Mason since 2017. Hi, Coach Aileen. How are you doing today?
I am great. I'm wishing the weather was a little bit better here in Virginia, but for the most part, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Same thing here. We have one nice day, and then the rest of the week is rainy and cloudy. Yeah.
Not ideal. Not ideal at all.
Right. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I know you're really busy in quarantine.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
off the charts. Never been busier.
Right. So I'm excited to hear some of your experiences as a college coach here. So just to start off, give us a quick background of your coaching career. When and where did you start, or maybe how?
Yeah, so I went to a smaller Division III school up in Massachusetts, Springfield College, which, shout out to Springfield College, the inventor of volleyball, William G. Morgan, he did go to Springfield, so very good ties. And
nice.
The birthplace of volleyball is just down the road in Holyoke, Mass., so that was fun. So I went there, I played, and kind of towards the end of my career, my coach, who was awesome, had kind of said, like, we would love for you to come back and be an assistant and be a graduate assistant. So I took a year off, coached high school, let me realize probably high school, not for me, should stick the college route. So I spent 3 years at Springfield being a graduate assistant. It was really fun. We were super successful in Division III, like went to an Elite Eight, won a bunch of regional finals, some conference championships. That was cool just to be back. After that, they finally pushed me out of Springfield. I couldn't stay anymore. And I took a job as the head coach at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, which is in the same conference as Springfield. So that was a little dicey. And the claim I had was that in my second year, I actually beat Springfield twice, which was so great and terrible all at the same time. It was terrible.
I bet.
It was terrible. After that, I actually kind of was recruited, kind of wanted to take a jump into Division I. So I went to work for Aaron Lindsay at Dartmouth, which was really, really cool because the Ivy League is just a totally different kind of beast of Division I when it comes to rules and time and just a different athlete. So that was fun. And then after that, I took a job as the director of volleyball operations, got my data volleying, my coding, my statting life together at UNC Chapel Hill, which was so fun and amazing because we won an ACC championship that year. We went to a Sweet 16. I saw Michael Jordan. When Duke played UNC that year, that was the ceiling is the roof thing. I was at that game, which made the experience super fun.
I bet.
And then after that, the position at George Mason was open, and I actually my sister lives 30 minutes down the road in Arlington. Some of my extended family's here in Virginia. And so, and my significant other, Colin, was already a professor of mechanical engineering here at George Mason. So it was honestly serendipitous that the job came open.
The best job for you.
Yeah. And it was a good, I don't mean to do this, but this is volleyball. Ready? I'm at UNC. We're hosting the Art of Coaching Volleyball. So the big, kind of nationwide thing where the best coaches come, and we're hosting it. And so it's Terry Liskevich and John Dunning and Russ Rose. We're all having dinner. at Joe Segula, the head coach at UNC's house, and we're talking. And while Russ was in town, he was like, does anybody know anybody who would like the job at George Mason? And I was like, yes, Russ,
Me.
I would. Pick me. And Russ was just like, that's so interesting because Russ has a connection with our men's coach at Mason, and it was right place, right time. And I was like, Russ, definitely, like, we could talk, and like, let's do it. So I couldn't believe how that happened. But then, I was fortunate enough to get the job at George Mason, and I've been here now. We're going into our 4th season, which seems like, no time has passed
Crazy.
at all. It's so crazy. But yeah, and I'm only 32, so I've had a bunch of jobs in the last 10 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was a good ride.
Yeah, and you said that you coached high school for a year after college. Did you always know that you wanted to be a coach, or did it change after you started playing?
Yeah, I originally went to Springfield because I wanted to be a physical educator, and my mom was a physical educator. I had coached some club, like regional teams when I was in college. Like I was like a sophomore and junior, just with like the 12s, which was awesome. Like I loved it. But then I think I definitely realized I wanted to get into coaching. I just didn't know what level I could fit in with. And so it was really important for my former coach, who I was going to go work for, that I did find a job coaching in that year off. And I was lucky that I'm originally from Long Island, and one of kind of the town next door to where I grew up was looking for a coach. And my high school coach like kind of let me know. And so I went and took the job at Oceanside High School, go Sailors, and it was a wild year. Like I was 22 coaching this varsity team, and I had to still run the JV and freshman teams. Yeah, and then like it's weird because I love recruiting, and that's all high school players, but I clearly was not meant to coach high school. I love coaching like young middle school, elementary school, high school. I don't know. It was just a little tricky. I loved it, and it gave me that experience to realize I wanted to go to college volleyball, but it was. I mean, it was a good learning experience.
I think it's a good experience for everybody.
Everybody should experience, I think, that level. And then you have a new respect for high school coaches that do it year in and year out.
Exactly, yeah. So what is it that makes you passionate or interested in coaching college?
I think the big thing that drew me to college was that it turns from being like a hobby and maybe something that your friends want to do when you're in high school and you just want to participate, to the athletes that want to play in college are driven to play in college, and they level up in the competition and what they're putting into the game. So that was really like inspiring for me. And I also think that working with 18 to 22-year-olds when they're trying to figure out what they want to do in their life, when there's really some like molding to go on, I think that was such a positive experience for me when I was in college with my coaches and the assistants, that I was like, this is what it's all about. And I think that those relationships are really fun. And I love, when it comes to volleyball, I love the fact of you're not teaching new skills to a lot of these players in college, but you're enhancing the skills that they're already great at and strengthening the ones that maybe they're not as good at. And I like that fine-tuning aspect of college more so than I think like, woo, that was your first serve over the net, like, right. Which is great too. But I think it's like these, they're such small incremental bumps, but that are just like world changing for college athletes, I think, and take them to the next level. So.
I completely agree, especially coming from Brazil, where we don't really play sports in college or high school. It's the only level we have is professional. So when we decide to be athletes, that's what we want to do. That's our whole life, and we don't have anything else going on. So I completely agree that in college, the player already knows that that's what they want to do, and that's their main focus. So that's the one thing that really got me into coaching. And also the part that's the stage of your life that you're still trying to figure out what you want to do and how you can grow. And that's how I felt when I was a student athlete. I grew so much during the 4 years I was here. So that's to me, one of the main things as well to help those young players to become not even a better player, but a better person, a better professional after their college career.
I mean, I'm sure you, as like someone who has trained setting and trained middles and things, you are then, especially in the setting piece, you're developing like a different mind of an athlete, which happens on the collegiate level. So the growth there is so big in the mental aspect of the game.
Yes.
And it's just such a small thing. Like you might tell a setter, okay, are you looking out of this side of your eye? And they had never thought about that before. Like that wasn't even a thing. And all of a sudden they are like acutely aware of it. And it's like, what?
Right? I can do that.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's nuts.
And that's one thing that I talked to another coach we have here in VVA. She was a setter for the national team in Brazil. And she said that for a setter specifically, you get better as you get older. You get smarter, wiser, and you can see things easier. So you can see the huge difference between a freshman and how she grows until her senior year, and how she can learn and see different things as she grows and she keeps playing.
That's why I think when we're playing adult league volleyball, I all of a sudden, at least, okay, not now, but like probably 5 years ago in my late 20s, I was like, wow, I am a lot better now. Like,
right.
Like not maybe the heart, like maybe I'm not like physically fit, but I am like, ooh, like this is, I can see it better.
I know where the ball is going.
Yes. And I think that's, I mean, for national teams, that's why like your late 20s are most national teams comprised of, because it's when you're hitting actually your peak of performance.
Both
is in that
physically and
phase.
mentally, yes.
Yeah. It's crazy.
All right, so great intro. So now let's talk about our practice planning here. So I think this can be really helpful to coaches who would like to hear different perspectives, and also to players who would like to know what to expect when they're joining a new team, a new club or college or whatever. So as you said, you've been to different places, you've worked with different coaches. So just give us a quick overview of some of those experiences, the differences and similarities between each staff you've worked with.
Yeah, so I actually have been lucky that most of the staffs I've been on are pretty collaborative in how they want to practice plan. I think that we've had, so for instance, my time at Dartmouth with Erin, she was great on empowering the assistants to take ownership of practice planning and really understanding the positional training that we were responsible for. So it certainly was our job to come in and really understand, if I'm working with the liberos, I think they need to do this today in practice, but I need some other time with the pins to work on passing as a unit. And then our other assistant, John, who was in charge primarily of the attacking and things like that, was like, well, we need to work a bit on transition work. Okay, that can combine after you do some passing, let's combine to do passing to attack after we've done some transition breakdown. And Erin, as the head coach, kind of oversaw the whole picture and was able to think about, we have matches coming up, and as a team, how can we look at that collectively when we get into 6-on-6? And then I think, it was maybe at UNC, it was like a little bit more technically drilling into how we were going to run it. It was like a lot more gameplay, because that was kind of Coach Segula's style. He wanted the game to teach the game. And so it was a lot more combination skills and things like that, which I really love too. I think the big thing for a lot of coaches is to try and get the staff as involved as possible so that they have buy-in to what you're doing. And yes, I think some days I will come into practice, or I will come into our practice planning session and be like, okay, we have to do this. Like, did you guys notice this? Like yesterday in practice, this was bad. We gotta get this going. But then in reality, I will rely pretty heavily on like, well, what did you guys see? Like, what is something that either the opponent could do to us and we need to prepare for it, or we need to get better and work through that. So I think what I try to bring in, and that a lot of people I've worked for have done, is like after the practice is over, so say it's a Monday, after practice is over, we might be talking a bit about what did we like, what did we not like, and then I'm kind of trying to drop in some, okay, well, let's think about that for tomorrow. And do we have any specific drills for that tomorrow? And coming the next day for Tuesday, ready with maybe that next level up. So there's a prep before the practice planning. But I think that that's so important because, yes, there are absolutely some days that I'm like, I know exactly what we're doing. Like, don't worry. Like, this is whatever. But other days I'm just like, no, like, what should we do? Like, I have an idea for maybe the setting group, but I don't know what the middles maybe really want. And I know what we could do together, but let's kind of all bring in the ideas. Because I think it's just more beneficial to get everybody's opinion and everything when it comes to practice planning. And that's sort of how I've learned it over the years. And when I've sat in with sessions with other coaches, it seems the collaborative effort and the position specific, because head coaches hopefully are humble enough to realize that I don't know everything about every position. So I'm going to need some help when it comes to that. And I have throughout my whole career, I have never hesitated to reach out to somebody else and been like, hey, what are you doing with this group? Do you have any good drills? And just because I don't know them all, nobody does. And I think that's just as critical in the practice planning piece as well, is reaching out and getting other ideas from other coaches in other programs, to be honest.
Oh yeah, I think 2 and 3 heads always think better than one. Yeah. Right? It's always important to hear other people's opinion, especially your assistant coaches. Yeah. And
I think the other thing that always strikes me is you want to be as intentional as possible, in my opinion. It's like we might have a 3-hour block, but I don't need to use the 3 hours if we don't need the 3 hours. I also think that if a team is nailing a drill, you don't need to just keep doing the drill. It's like,
good job.
It was great.
Don't wait until it gets bad.
Right. And then I think there's times where you need to cut it off because it's just like, we are not getting anywhere with this. Like we need to move it along. But I think the big thing for a lot of players is that they need to realize most good coaches are spending a lot of time thinking about practices. We're not just like throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks.
There's always a reason why we're doing in practice.
Correct. And I think that the big thing I realized, and maybe you did too, because you went from a player to a graduate assistant to an assistant. When I made the transition from player to graduate assistant, my eyes were open so much to the behind the scenes practice planning piece. Because it wasn't just, we're going to focus on this, but it always has an underlying thing that the players usually aren't realizing that they're actually working on.
They don't see it.
While they're doing something else. And it's like, if you're playing a 6-on-6 drill and so for instance, at Mason, we have a great, outstanding outside hitter. She jumps through the roof. She's super powerful. She would swing at every ball if we let her. Every ball. She would swing as hard as she can at every ball. So sometimes we need to tell her, guess what? You're just tipping. You need to tip. Right. You can throw. You can do that. That is one piece of the puzzle, because guess what else? We don't defend the tip well. So now the team is just thinking, well, we got her working on that. What are we doing? Yeah, you're working on tip defense. Come on. And I think sometimes athletes forget that piece, but us as coaches are always like, oh, yeah, we can get 2 for 1 on that. Let's do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think
I don't know if that was for you the same thing when you went from student to assistant. Like, what?
Yeah, so that's why we're doing this. That's a good point of view. Yeah. Like, as a player, you're just on the court trying to play. You don't think about why you're doing that drill. But yeah. You're
going into it. The other thing we do is we put everything on the whiteboard so that there's no surprises in practice. You know exactly what's coming. We're pretty regimented with time. And I think some players are quick to be like, oh, that drill's on the board.
We're doing that today.
Yeah, like we're doing that. And then others, they'll see it and be like, oh, yes, like I love that 6-on-6 game. I'm so excited. And I think that helps because you always want that drill in the beginning of the season that the team hates to be the one that they love at the end, because they realize they've either gotten better at the drill, they've beaten the drill, or they're just like, oh my gosh, do you remember what this looked like when we started? Like that was.
I remember one time we did a drill in practice and we see that it was not good at all. So we decided to do the same drill for the next 3 days. And at the end of the 3rd day, it was great. Yeah. We could see such an improvement from the first day that we did the same drill.
And that's what I think, I think a lot of old school coaches, they do a lot of those ball control drills that are really like excruciating when you're in it, because you're like, how am I ever going to get out of this? But then you're so good. It helps so much. It's such a basic thing that you elevate to an incredible level. And I remember, and I'm sure my assistant, Jordan, who played for me her senior year, she would remember this to the T and be like, I can't believe I hated it when you did it. I thought when we started preseason my first year, I was like, I need to see everybody's kind of ball control and things like that. So like, can we just overhead pass back and forth without doubling? Like for a minute, like that doesn't seem hard to me, but like it was. And it was the whole team, middles included.
That's the problem right there.
And we would start the clock, and I'd be watching, and if somebody doubled, I'd blow the whistle, the clock would have to restart. And, like, how many times we had to do it. And I remember, Jordan coming back onto staff and being like, so are you still doing that? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm doing it, because how many times, Mari, have you watched in games where a ball, the middles land, they come off of a block, they turn, and a ball's just rocketing at their head, like a dig that's gone right. And now
they have to use their hands. They don't have another option.
They have no option. And they're like fumbling around, doubling. And I'm like, we're never going to have that happen. We don't need unnecessary errors when we could be good at this by taking 1 minute of practice to work on it.
No, I agree. In my junior college, our coach would do serve and pass almost every single day. And everybody was, and even middles, setters, everybody was serving, everybody was passing. And we had to learn, even, as you said, maybe middle blockers, we never pass, but maybe there's a short serve or a free ball that comes to us, and what are we going to do? We have to be able to pass that ball. So I think it's important to work on everything with every player.
And I think the planning piece, I remember when we got to Mason, we had to be we were changing a lot of things, which I think happens at every program that gets a new coach and anything. We were changing a lot of things in how we warmed up, how we started practices, like things like that, which I really took from other programs. And the things that I took, especially at UNC, was that we would do a modified butterfly drill to begin serve and pass, our serve and pass time on match day. And at first we put this in and they were like, what do you, like, everybody's doing butterfly? Like, everybody's going to pass. Everybody's going to hit. I was like, the only people that are staying where they are the setters. Like, that's it. And we evolved this where the first one is just a tip. Fine, we're tipping it to our partner, easy. And we're, like, throwing the ball over, getting our shoulders warm. And then we're putting it over, we're roll shotting it. And then by the end, you were pretty much serving controlled full and swinging full, and the person that just served it is digging. And it's amazing for me to see what it looks like, honestly, 3 years later. And it's interesting for me to see the freshmen come in their first match day and have to do it. And they're like, okay. And then for them to feel more and more comfortable, and their ball control and their arm swings are just so much more controlled. But it's such a basic drill that you can think about the athletes at UNC. They're like All-Americans. They're like trying out for the national team. That year the year I was there, we had some unreal players. And I was like, no, we could do this at Mason. Like, it's fine. Like, it's the same athlete. But they had to really buy into, like, doing it. And now it's amazing because I could have seen me just collapsing after year one. Like, ooh, that just didn't go well. No one felt good doing it on game day. But now it's so routine in our program that I think it's so helpful. And it's amazing to see. Anytime our middles serve, it's great. And anytime our middles dig, I'm confident that they can get that ball. I really am.
And they get excited for themselves. Their teammates get excited for them, and it's a fun environment when that happens. When someone does something that is not expected from them, it's always fun to see that reaction from the team.
Yeah, and I think that was a planning piece that we really had to think about, and we had to reiterate to them, like, this is helpful, guys. This is getting us in the groove of match day. You're going to need to do all these things. And for the setters, it was great. They were getting good reps and live balls and everything. So it was, but it took a little. It took a little to get.
A lot of hard work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so that was good. So you said that you always rely on your assistant coaches to help you. What about if you don't have an assistant? For example, with your experience at high school, did you have an assistant helping you?
No, it was just me all the time. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, because even at Coast Guard, I had one assistant. Like it wasn't like this group of people. And what I tried to do, I've always kind of been into film. Not that I was watching film at the high school level, like I was not. But what I really tried to do when I was a solo coach, and even when I was in college coaching club, and it was just me with my 12s, I really tried to, as soon as we finished practice for that day, or we finished a tournament day, I tried to write down all the things I think we needed to work on. Mm-hmm. Because I maybe wasn't ready to do full-blown practice planning, but I didn't want to forget that these things were fresh in my mind. And so I was pretty litigious and meticulous about writing all these things down positionally that I thought we needed to work on, and then as a team what we needed to work on. Mm-hmm. I think when you're alone, though, as a solo coach, which I give credit to anybody who is, honestly, is that you have to be super specific when it comes to planning the courts, the ball carts, the targets, and how the drill is operating, because you lose you lose perspective when you are on a full-fledged staff with student assistants and managers. You're every ball cart's there, everything's fine. You got a million people. When you're by yourself, you're okay, I'm going to need someone to catch. I'm going to need someone hitting. Where am I going to be? Because most of the time you're in the drill. And
even just to start the drill, sometimes you would need to start the drill with a down ball, and you have 5 assistants to do that. Great. When you're by yourself, how do you do it?
Exactly. Who's keeping score? Who's keeping score? Am I keeping score while I'm hitting down balls in? Okay, winning side gets it, cool. I'm running to the other side, great. But I think that when I felt that it was really helpful that if I wrote down all those things following practice, that the next day I could then leave that there on that day, and then the next day pick it up and be okay, time to plan and think about those things, who is going where, and sort of separating it out. So I didn't feel super stressed thinking about what we should work on, and also figuring out how does this drill run with
just
12 athletes and me. How do we do this? But I think that I have watched, and I've felt I have taken that into the rest of my career by letting the players initiate a lot of things. It's not always pretty. It is weird to see Division I athletes not know how to down ball
a control down ball to to start a drill.
I think that, and I think using injured athletes who are on the sideline, and maybe they are capable of doing something, of tossing a ball in, of, just feeding to the setter a ball, keeping score, keeping a stat, and using as many players as you can for them to stay active, for you not to kill yourself running around the gym. And I think that is the most critical. And you just don't want, any athletic director I've always worked for, they don't want kids standing around.
Yeah.
So why not use them in these different scenarios? But it definitely, I think you have to be way more of a planner when you're by yourself, because I think that it's, you never know what is going to happen when one kid doesn't show up for practice that day, or one kid, got detention and they're not there, or they had extra help and they can't make it. And then you're okay, totally fine. Let's slot this person in.
Let's adapt.
Yeah, we got to adapt and we got to change. But I think anytime anybody can coach solo, I think it's a great learning experience that then when you have a staff around you, you're wow, this is
awesome.
This is awesome. I can't believe that this is, and that's why I think I'm so grateful when I have good assistants, because I'm I can actually watch.
Don't worry about anything else. Just watch, practice, and see how our team is doing.
Yeah.
Yes. I also had an experience with just one coach. I was a player, it was back in my junior college. And my first year, she had a volunteer coach so she had someone to help. But my second year, it was just the head coach. And as a player, I thought she was a hero to do everything that she had to do by herself. Because she also had a second job at the junior college. So she was a head coach, and she was also, I think, a student success kind of person for the junior college. So to me, I was watching her work all day long and coming to practice and having everything ready to go. I was like, okay, you're awesome for doing what you're doing right now.
That is so amazing. I think sometimes, and I don't know if you feel this way, we've definitely talked about this before. Sometimes I don't think that any student athlete, whatever level it is, sometimes I'm convinced that they don't realize that coaches have other lives.
Right.
like I'm like, you guys know, like, we actually have other things going on, not just this practice.
Yes.
Like, we do have.
There's so much more, involved in not only volleyball, but everything else we do.
And I think too, like, I give a lot of people credit when, like, you're a junior college coach, like, I need to meet this person, because not only, I think the bigger thing, not only are you then responsible for planning practices and checking in with your student athletes and being there and being available, but then you are doing all of your budgeting, you are ordering all the meals, you are handling all the travel, like the administrative work that goes on behind the scenes is crazy. And I think in my career, I've had two stops that really prepared me for that. One was at Coast Guard, because the paperwork was nuts. As a military academy, the amount of paperwork was crazy. And then being a director of ops at UNC, because it was such a huge institution, I had a lot of responsibilities administratively, and both of those really prepared me to be a head coach, like at a Division I level, because you have to do other things. But again, I go back to players not realize, like, no clue. And I think that it is, like, I would bet, I don't know about you, Mari, but there's no way any coach is going to say, I love doing food ordering. Like, I love ordering food for the team. It's really easy. The process is streamlined. Nobody has any issues. There's never problems. That position alone, that task you have to do, oh my gosh.
It takes a lot of time, yes. I think that the 2 or 3 hours that we spend on the court are the easiest hours of our day.
That's what really is holding, I think, so many people into coaching, is the physical act of coaching, because you're like, otherwise you're like, oh, that is not that enjoyable. But your time on the court is it. And I think that sometimes players get caught up in, like, oh, coaching is so great. Like, you're just doing volleyball. And I'm like, okay, well, take a minute. There's a lot of other things we have to worry about.
Volleyball is the fun part, but it's not the only thing we deal with every day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I think it's just, you get, as a player, I think you get accustomed to what you are being provided, and you don't understand totally how much goes into it behind the scenes.
Yes. I still love it, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't change it. Yeah. But going back to when you're talking about planning your practice every day or after each practice, I can use my example here at NVVA. I think I used to practice, we had practice twice a week, so I would sit down on Monday and plan both practice for the week at the same time. But then after the first practice of the week, I would always change my mind, because something had happened in practice that I didn't like it, or I thought that we had to work more on that. So I think there's a lot of different ways that coaches work and plan their practice. But I think one important thing is that you should wait for after every practice to plan the next one, because something is always going to change. You're always going to see something that you didn't like and you think that you should work on. So I think one important piece here is to just plan day after day as you go, and you see what your team is doing, what they're struggling with, or whatever it is. I think it's important to plan one day at a time. For sure. I definitely agree with that. I think that's how we tend to do it. I think maybe with the exception of kind of like serve and pass, we'll do that every day, but it's still, like, not specific. Like,
yes, serve and pass might be in the plan every day, but the kind of serve and pass we're doing is going to be different every day. And I agree, because sometimes you have to find the strengths of your team and then decide, like, are we going to improve upon those strengths, be excellent, top notch, or are we going to look at some other things that maybe we're not great at and we need to bring those to mediocre almost because we were bad at them. Let's bring them to middle ground. And I think that so at Mason, we have a different schedule that I kind of learned from my time at Dartmouth about having days off closer to game days. So we don't practice on Tuesdays. It's a crazy academic day at Mason, and it gives us rest time before we play on Friday. So when we look at our week for planning, we absolutely are going in every day is a different day, but we are also trying to gear up towards doing more skill specific, and we're going to play 6-on-6 every day, but it might be less, and then we amp it up more towards the end of the week, where if we have a 2-hour slot, maybe that last day, like Thursday, we are playing for an hour and 15 minutes total of just 6-on-6. And then the other time, maybe we're doing setters and middles, serve and pass, something like that. As opposed to the beginning of the week, Sundays, which is we consider our start of the week, we've just played. So we've played Friday, Saturday. It's going to be lower impact. It's going to be way more skill focused, less jumping. But you're right about everything would change every day after practice. And your idea of what you thought you were going to spend time on would be like, oh, that's bad. That did not go as planned. However, I do think, and I can remember being an assistant, and I loved being an assistant, but I felt like as an assistant, I got very tunnel vision on some things. I'm like, we are terrible at this. We have to get better at this. This is all I want. And I try as a head coach to, even if we have a bad day on something, I try to think about the big picture about what we actually overall struggle with. Like, yes, maybe today we were terrible at coverage. I don't know. A lot of balls were dropping. And so I'd be like, we probably need to do, emergency skills or floor moves or something, which, every player just loves. But in reality, we're not actually bad at that all the time. So I can't freak out. Like, yes, maybe we need to go back to that drill, but no, we should not be like putting a half hour into emergency.
It was just a one-day thing.
Yeah. And so I think trying to keep that in perspective, but correct about, I could never go and be like, all 5 days are already planned. We are going to do this every day.
Let's stick to it.
Yeah, and it's not. And I think that I think that there are some methods of teams doing the same thing every day, which I'm totally fine with. We talked about it earlier. Sometimes you see great improvements in those doing a drill every day. But I do think that every day is an opportunity to change and get better. And the players, I think, appreciate the variety in the drills and understanding that every day we're going to take a look at it, even if it means that we thought we had something planned, we're going to tweak it just a little bit. We're going to change it just a little bit. If the setters were just working on this, okay, now we're going to take them off the net and continue to work on that same thing. But that was a change. They were at the net, now they're off the net. They're coming from zone rotation 1, they're coming from rotation 4, whatever it is. So I think that for sure happens in the planning, but I think that me as a head coach has learned to try to look big picture when at times it's easy to get locked in on something that either you're excellent at or you're not doing well at all. And trying to like stay kind of level about it. And that's why so I don't know if you think this, but this is why film is so critical, because you can always tend to remember something. And this is why players need to watch film. I am a huge advocate. They need to watch film. You think something happened the way you think it did, but you go back and watch film and be like, oh my gosh, that is not what happened at all. That actually turned out really well. It's the same thing with stats. You think somebody's having a good game and you're like, they're really crushing and stuff. And then you look and they're like, they're hitting 150. Really. That's not actually good. They didn't make a lot of mistakes, but we're not actually putting any balls away. So I don't know. Like, I think that the film aspect when you look back at practice is really important too, to get a feel for what happened and what it looked like away from the moment that you're standing next to the court.
Yeah, now you have more time to think about, to watch what actually happened, and you're not as excited because of the game is going on, or you're just, you're sitting at home just analyzing exactly what happened.
And I think you are doing exactly what you said. You're analyzing. Like, I'm sure you've walked away from practices, whether playing or coaching, and you thought it went one way, and then you look at
After
back,
watching.
and you're either like, actually, that went better
than I thought it did. Yeah.
I-
So now that we're talking about game and that kind of thing, let's jump into the different phases of our season. We have preseason, in-season, postseason. So starting with the beginning here, how do you prepare your team before the official competition starts? How does a preseason look like to you? And not only for your team now at George Mason, but if you were coaching a club or a high school, what would you focus more during that period of time?
So I think everybody has different schedules in how much gym time they have and everything. So that's going to depend on something. But I do think it's important, and I learned this at Springfield, I learned this at the high school level, that if you have 2 sessions, that you should make them different in how the athletes are being trained during those 2 sessions, during preseason. So before you get to your first competition, I think whether you have a week, 3 weeks, whatever it is, I think you need to spend some time, and I can't overlook this, because even at the highest top 25 level, you're still working fundamentals. You are still going to spend a good amount of time working on platform angles, working on setter mechanics, working on transition approaches, things like that, like very technical things that might seem slow in the drill, but they're setting a baseline so that you don't need to return to those when you're going to start worrying about scouting reports and competition. So I find that it's really important to do some sort of like technical training in one of the sessions. And then I do believe it's really important to let the athletes play, but play with a purpose. So you're trying to get this out of a drill. You're trying to get them to think about point scoring, or you're trying to get to see 2 kids compete against each other in the same position. Whatever it is, I think it's really important to see those 2 things, both technical and both competition, in the weeks leading up to your first match, because you don't want to get bogged down worrying about like blocking footwork in October. Like, not the time we should be thinking about this. But at the same time, you want in that preseason to see who can rise to the occasion in the competition level when you're playing 6-on-6, to see what it's going to be like when the lights are on and the scoreboard matters. And so I think we have done a good job of, and then for us in the college level, trying to get some sort of weightlifting going on in between that, or maybe some individuals, but really having, and not really having some sort of workout / a different kind of muscle exercise, not volleyball, in between the 2 sessions, so that their bodies aren't just locking into that same routine. I think it's really helped the athletes. I think it's, no matter what, it's fatigue and it's painful in the beginning, but I think that gets them more prepped, because that first match, when you're playing and there's timeouts, there's the refs taking it slow, you're like, this is nothing.
This is easy.
Like, this is not, free ball drills were killing me. This is like, we're pausing every 42 seconds, no big deal. And I think you're trying to set the stage for what can become of your team. And I think you kind of, once you get into that first competition, those first non-conference games, is then you're like, okay, now what do we really need to work on that was exposed that we didn't know playing against each other?
Yeah.
And so you move into that where you're like, non-conference, let's figure it out. Let's try if we need to different lineups or settle into a same lineup. But the planning of practice is still now, we need to get ready for an opponent while also continuing to work fundamentals and compete, but adding a little bit of that scouting report aspect. And for young players, I think that's a really critical time for them to get the hang of what it's going to be like when you get into conference play and when you're really having to lock in on, like, you're not going to play 3 opponents or 4 opponents in a weekend anymore. You're going to play one, and you probably already played them once already in conference, so you know them. So I think that you definitely need the preseason, whatever amount of time you have. Even if you have one practice, you got to split it up and do technical stuff, and then you got to play all day.
Yeah, I think the technical part of it is really important, especially because whatever you're in college or in club or high school, you have new players who are coming from different places, who have different backgrounds, and they probably don't know how you play. For sure, they don't know how you play, how your philosophies and whatever you like to do on the court. So I think it's really important to focus on that part, because to make sure everybody's on the same page, because everybody's going to have a different mindset. So it's important to work on those technical skills so everybody knows exactly what they're doing and why they're doing.
Yeah, and I think, too, it'd be like if you and I are new teammates and now we're going to pass in every rotation next to each other, I better know, like, what you like and what you don't. Like, if you don't really prefer taking balls to your left and now I'm going to take all of them, okay, good to know. Like, great. If I'm a libero and I know that my outside hitter is going to bail every time the ball gets passed, essentially, like, to her right because she wants to go in transition, okay, I'm going to have to take that. Got it. And so I think it is you have to get on the same page, and you have to get players to understand the tendencies of their teammates. Because even being away if you're a high school coach, so maybe they haven't played together in 8 months, you forget. Like, unless you are going from high school straight into club with the same group of people, I don't know how you're that comfortable in August to be like, oh yeah, we're good.
And even high school and club, the players play other sports. They play basketball and softball and soccer. So they come back and they actually forgot what volleyball looks like. It could happen.
I absolutely, like, I was a basketball softball player, and you just kind of you think it's going to be so easy. Like, sure, I was a great attacker. I'm going to do this, and now you're like, what? Okay, like, let me get back into it. And even just I always think about passing, but you think about, like, the setter-hitter connection, and you're like, whoa, if it's someone new, if it's somebody different, somebody jumps higher. I mean, I think that is so important, because when you do the technical stuff, that's actually when you're really seeing all those different changes and trying to get a feel. Because when you're playing, let's be real, I'm sure you were the same way. You're not thinking about that when you're playing competition. You're thinking, I need to score a point. I need to win.
I think preseason is the only time that you have to fix those small details. Once you start playing, then you don't worry about that anymore. It's all about your team, how your team is performing, together. So I think preseason is the most critical part of the season to actually prepare your team for what's coming.
And I think, too, it's like even great players they need to make adjustments in their game based on who they're playing against. And so you don't want to be worrying about fundamentals when now you're about to tweak that even more to worry about how they should play. So if I'm a middle, which I never was, so you can talk to me about this. If I'm a middle and I know that they're always in rotation and I need to figure out a way to hit, like, up and over or tip to fork, but that's not really in my game normally, because instead, if they're playing perimeter and I'm crushing it into the corners every time and no one's there, great. But I think that's when you then are like, okay, well, we can't worry about these other things because we're about to play this team, and you need to be able to do this, this, and this.
Yes.
And so preseason, you get to work on working out the kinks, setting the stage, setting good habits and good routines. And then I think it is that excitement of elevating up when you get to play against somebody else, and really just kind of prepare and change. And you're not trying to change what you do, but you're trying to adapt to make more and better adjustments, whether that's attacking, like you're trying to score points. You can't always go cross court if they got their libero camped out there. But if they're playing their libero and middle back, like, sure, go for it. Go. Like, just like crush them over there. And so I think and then, you have to try to figure that as you go through the parts of the season and you get closer to conference tournament or the NCAA tournament or playoffs in high school or AAUs or nationals for club, that's the time where, yes, you want your athletes in the best shape, and they could be dealing with injuries. The club season is super long. The college season is super long. And so that's when you're almost like tapering off. In my opinion, you're tapering off to have really constructive, intense, short practices. Like, you might usually be on like a 2.5 hour block. Let's do it. Now maybe it's like, let's get in and get to work for an hour. Mm-hmm. And go as hard as we can, and then we have that time off so that they feel as rested as they can going into those, because maybe that's more time you can spend on film, or maybe that's more time you can spend on like team bonding. You might be on the road more for conference, tournament play, whatever, traveling to Florida, AAUs. So I think that it's like, I think that every portion, I think sometimes there's 4 parts of your season, almost like of preseason, non-conference, conference, and postseason. Mm-hmm. And each one of those is treated so differently. But for the most part, athletes, coaches have a plan for all 4 of those things. And you will be treated differently, probably, in all 4 of those stages.
Yes. Yes, that's great. So now we went through preseason, we're ready to rock and roll. So how do you approach your in-season period, that those 2 or 3 months that you play twice a week? Maybe you have those long tournaments, 2-day tournament at the beginning. What do your practices look like now during season?
Yeah, so our practices, we personally, which I found over the years, I've just witnessed a lot of coaches doing this. We tend to do what we call a breakdown. So we're doing some sort of skill programming breakdown. So that might be on 2 different courts. It might be like, we'll have a passer. We might be doing serve and pass with just setters and middles. And then on the other court, we're doing pass to attack with the outsides. And all they're doing, they're the only passer, and they're going and taking approaches and stuff like that. But then we'll do that maybe for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we combine to do a game or do a full group exercise that's like for 20 minutes with a scoreboard on and things like that. We think that most of the time the breakdowns cross over for most athletes pretty well into that version of competition. So we try to keep that going. So again, if we're doing something where it's like we're working a lot on defense for our outside or pin hitters and our setters, we'll go super hard on defense on one court. The liberos over there, though, they're just putting out-of-system balls up over and over and over and over, and then we come together and it's just a straight-up out-of-system scrimmage. And we're crushing balls at the other defenders, or we're tossing it up essentially for a free ball for a hitter to hit at one of them, and then letting the liberos step in, take an out-of-system ball. So most of our practices will go like that for the first hour-ish, and then we might play for the last hour of 6-on-6. I think as a coach, no matter what, you're lucky if you are not dealing with injuries at some point or another. So I think a big portion of planning practices for this time of season is knowing who's in, who's available, who has constraints, and what you can still do with them based on that. And like we talked about earlier, making sure the injured player is maybe like in a boot. That doesn't mean that their arm is broken. So put them up on a box and like let them hit some balls. And so I think it's making sure that everybody stays involved. But for the most part, our practices run like that. Maybe Monday, Wednesday, we're starting to put in kind of like a scouting report with whether the athletes know it or not on Wednesday. We're starting to do some things that maybe the other team does or we need to do against them. And then on Thursday, a lot of it is straight up like, this is what they're going to do. We should be prepared for this. And I think I've taken that from my time at Springfield. We had done that, and then I was lucky enough that kind of along the road, a lot of the other coaches I've worked for have also done that. But mind you, there are some times in the regular season where it's just like fun. Like if we have a lighter weekend or we are only playing one match and Sunday practice comes, Sunday could just be like we're going to have a good time. We're going to play a lot of doubles, triples, like just do an ultimate competition. Just do something to mix it up, where I think it's super valuable to just try to do something different. Like, let your athletic trainer serve a ball in or two. You've witnessed that, Mark.
Yeah, let the liberos play as a middle.
And so I think that you can do some stuff to keep morale high, because middle of October, you're dealing with midterms. You're dealing with so much stress. They've been in it now for 2.5 months. It's not even near over. Like, they're like, the end is not in sight. And so I think you try to keep it fresh, and you try to, and you try to listen to the team, honestly. If you're getting some feedback on, like, we're getting a little tired, we're doing this, like, maybe you need to change some things up. But I think in the meat of the season, you're trying to keep them in it as much as possible, because it's easy to lose athletes at that point. Even in high school, honestly, I think that when you get to end of September and it's the middle of the high school season, kids are just spacing out. They're 15. They're just like, what do I care about this? Yeah. Like, I don't know. So I think it's definitely trying to keep everybody engaged is super important during that portion of the season. Yeah.
And speaking about injuries, even for clubs in high school, we have a smaller roster than college. College, we have 18, 20 players. So if someone gets hurt, we have 2, 3, 4 more players that can come in and play. Club, we have 1 player per position, 2 per position. If someone gets hurt, it's really complicated, and we have to adjust. And even in college, I can use my example last year at Valdosta. We had 11 players. Our roster had 11 players. So first of all, it was really hard to plan practice, because 11 is an odd number. Any drill you try to plan, it just doesn't work. So as an assistant coach, I was always the 12th player who had to play the drills, and even 6-on-6, because we only had 11 players. So it's really important to think about the players you have and how you can use them. For example, maybe during mid-season, October, late October, our team was completely done physically. It was really hard for them to maintain a high-level performance, because they were tired. They were, in practice, there was no subs. They had to play the whole time. They couldn't, take a break. So we had to plan every practice now, thinking about their health. Are they going to be able to do what we're planning or not? Because if we push them too hard during practice, they wouldn't be able to play in the weekend, So I think that's a really important thing to think as well, because you have to feel how your players, or see how your players are feeling, so you know exactly what to do and don't hurt them even more.
Yeah, and I think that it's true, and I think that getting creative when you don't have a lot of players is like really critical in the planning piece, because that 11 is common for club, I think, and like 10 or 11 players per team in club. And so I think you do have to get really creative, and you have to, I believe this even on the college level, that you have to understand, and the players need to understand, that sometimes it's not always going to look pretty, and you might not play in the position in practice, not in matches, that you normally play. And I think that I look, sometimes when I'm recruiting high school athletes, I look for those players that at times have had to step in and just do something else. And I'm like, that's great. Like, that's awesome. You see it from a different perspective, but I agree that the injury piece is just, it's so critical to be on the same page with your athletes and know what's going on with them, and know, honestly, athletes who actually can push through and they want to, and others that just, they got to pump the brakes, or else they will fly off the ledge trying to go 100 miles an hour. And I think, it's not a sign of weakness for coaches if they cancel a practice. It's not. Or if, I remember this so well. So my college coach, I only learned this again once I went to the coaching side. And he told me this story, and now I remember it so well as a player. He told me that sometimes, Aileen, you just need to talk to your team. And I was like, well, yeah, you need to talk to your team. Like, what does that mean? He's like, no, you need to really talk during practice. Like the start of practice, you just got to go and talk and talk and talk and talk. I was like, you always talk. Like, what are we getting at? And he was like, Aileen, do you remember, I was like a junior team. He's like, the whole team was injured. Like everybody was just sore and whatever. And he goes, I talked to you guys for like 45 minutes at the start of practice so that you guys thought we were practicing. But in reality, all we did is maybe an hour, maybe. But you didn't know it at the time, but I just had you guys not doing anything. And it really, I think, probably helped you more than you realize. And I was like, those are some real Jedi mind tricks that you don't think about when you're like telling kids, like, we're just going to do some film today. And maybe it has, and you give them a really hard reason, like, we need to do film because of this, 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 and this. And it, in the back of your mind, really, it's because everyone's tired.
You need a break.
And everybody is like kind of falling apart, but you need to like keep the group together. And so I think it's so critical. And the injuries are just so, I think that's how it is. And you never want to rush anyone back and you want to give them the time. And you have to balance thinking up cool things when you don't have the right people. Like we played one time in spring, you remember when we played like switch positions and the liberos were middles? and it wasn't because we were down players, but I also wanted to give everybody a different perspective. But in reality, I had used that once before because we were missing a setter. And so let the middles be the setters. And it didn't matter that we didn't have another setter because they were going to set and the liberos were going to be middles. And it kind of looks crazy, but you're still working on ball control. You're still working on communication. You're still in your system. And so it can work.
Okay, so that adaptation part of the of our practice. Yeah. You're trying to adapt, but at the same time, there's a purpose behind it and you're waiting to get something out of it. But talking about injury, I think it's really important too for the players to feel comfortable to tell the coaches that they're tired. Because a lot of times, and I can use my example as a player, I was hurting, I was tired, but I would never tell my coach that I was because that could be a sign of weakness or something like that. So if the coaches don't know how you feel, then they're going to keep pushing you and maybe they're going to go over the limit that they should be going. So I think it's important to have that communication between player and coach too, so everybody knows what's going on and we can plan according to how the players feel as well.
For sure. And players, I think, always have to know that there's only one of us and there's 17 of them. And so we're trying to keep track of everyone's health for 17 people, both mentally and physically. And so it is so much easier when a player can just openly say, like my shoulder's really bothering me, my ankle, I haven't been feeling well or I haven't been sleeping. Things like that I think are just so helpful because we don't always instinctually know something's wrong. I wish we did. I wish I had like a sixth sense of like, oh, Mari's knee's bothering her. I should back off, but I don't. I have a great athletic trainer who helps that. But I think some players don't want to be weak, and so they won't say anything. But we'd appreciate the feedback more than they know.
For sure. Yes, it's a two-way street. It's way easier when we have players who can communicate with us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So now we've gone through our in-season and we're getting ready for the most exciting part of the year, postseason, playoffs, or nationals, whatever it is. So at this point of the season, what do your practice look like? No more maybe individuals or technical skills, all 6-on-6. And now you gotta account for the physical part of it. Maybe the athletes are tired. We can't push them as hard. So what do your practice look like at this point of the season?
Yeah, I think so. For us, for us in the A10, it's a little tricky because we finish and then the following weekend is our tournament. So there's a quick turnaround to get into postseason. But really, if you've made the tournament, you're thinking about it kind of leading up to it. Some of the big things that we really think about are getting us to a place of optimal performance and how can we peak at the right time and have everybody or as many people as we can peak at the right time. So we definitely spend kind of like I said earlier, we spend less time practicing, but it's more purposeful practice so that we are resting them a good amount, but we're telling them we need to go as hard as you can for the hour. Like, you're going to warm up, you're going to go through some stuff, and then if we're going to play for an hour, it's going to be as hard as you can for an hour. And it's going to be specific, and it's going to be maybe what our future opponent is or something we need to specifically work on. And then the other portion going into postseason is you want the team feeling really good. Like, whether you are coming in at number one, which I've been a part of a couple programs, or you're just limping into the playoffs, but you're in. It doesn't matter.
You barely made it, but you made it.
You're in it. And so I think the big thing is you want them feeling like good, and you want to do some stuff morale-wise that's like really fun. And I think for high school, it's like pasta parties and like toilet papering or whatever kids do. That's what we did. And for college, I think it's like taking them out to a special meal, doing some like fun stuff. Like, we will do some random entertaining house challenges, we call them minute to win it games, and just kind of keeping like spirits up when, you know, you have the opportunity for that and the time to do it. I think, you know, for club, I always found that for club, a great time was like, you have all that time at the hotel. You're out, and maybe it's before you head into the last day, and you're going to play in the gold bracket, and you might be kind of tired. But what are you doing as a team that's going to be such a morale boost? That's like super fun and entertaining, and like whether it's a dance party, whether that's you're playing categories, something that's a good time. And I think that the morale piece is something that can't be diminished. I think it's something that we really look at when we're getting ready for the postseason. And I think when it comes to planning for practices, we are trying to work that in specifically. So like last year, it was, I think we had a final game on like a Saturday, and then the tournament was going to start a following Thursday. And so it was like, okay, we are going to now change it up, and on Wednesday night, we're going to have a really nice dinner before we go. And like on that Monday, we're going to do something fun in practice. But the team, great teams will be mentally raring to go when it's time to play. They can have all the fun, but they'll be super laser focused. And I think that's what you're prepping your team to do. And that's what I think is really important, because again, back to the injury piece, you are still worried and hoping that everyone's going to be healthy and raring to go, but you might still be cautioning bringing someone back to full force, which is definitely a thing that happens kind of frequently, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that mental part of it. I think in postseason, not always the most times the team is going to win, because, you know, maybe they're not mentally there. Maybe a less talented team prepared themselves way better, you know, mentally speaking, than that great team that was probably maybe the number one seed. So I think, you know, it's just a one game, a 1 day thing, a 2 hour thing. Maybe during those 2 hours, you're just not having it. You're not having your good day. Nothing's working. So I think it's really important to work on that mental part of your game, because it's just a quick game. So anything can happen. And I think whoever is more prepared mentally is just a one step ahead of everybody else already.
Yeah, and I think that being able to go into the tournament realizing that your record no longer matters. Like, you're in postseason now, so like it doesn't matter what happened in the past. It doesn't matter if you just lost your last game or you blew them out 3-0, 25-2. Like you're everybody now is on the same level, and so I think that it's just kind of like that mentality. I think in club, when I watch gold brackets, it's always so entertaining because the teams might not have ever seen each other. Like in the whole tournament, this might be their first time meeting. They both could have gone like 10-0 throughout the weekend, and now they're both playing each other. And I think that that's when you hopefully have that fire and that grit from the athletes, but you also want them to be calm and realize they worked really hard to get there. Regardless of what the outcome is going to be, they worked exceptionally hard to get to that place. And I think making sure to express the gratitude of how hard they had worked in these last 4 months or whatever it is like very important. And that's why I think, making sure the team recognizes that and feels that is super, super important to get everybody kind of on the same page and the morale as high as it can go.
And there's always a lot of pressure, right, going to the game. So thinking about practice now, any drills that you have that can help the players with that pressure? You're closing the game, it's 22-20. How do you close that game when, the championship is in line? Any drill that comes to your mind when we think about pressure?
We play a game. Well, so we've played a couple. We've played a couple games. One of them is called Set the Bar, that a friend of mine, my former assistant Chris, he took from Pittsburgh, who, they've been pretty stellar recently. So, but Set the Bar is so funny because it's like the point scoring has to happen, and that's the one team that's receiving is actually setting the bar for how many points the other team will then need to score in order to win. And I think what cracks me up in that game is like it's low scoring. Like, the runs aren't really long, so it might be 4. Which is a lot. And the other team is like on their 4th point and they just need one more. And the pressure that builds.
How do you not shank that pass when
it's immense.
When it's game point?
So, right. And so we've played that. I've been playing this game for a long time called Slip and Slide, where you start at 20-20 and no matter what, when you get to 23, you have to score the next 2 or else you go back to 20. And what cracks me up about that game is obviously they're worried about the 24th and 25th point, but like when they get to 23, the communication that starts to build all of a sudden with the team that like we need these next 2 points, and like the other team that's trying to fend off is like make the mistakes, like make them play the ball, all this stuff. And so I think like those 2 games have gotten us into this like really interesting dynamic of finishing games and leveling up points. We play a lot of games that are like aggressive in game plan and strategy, and if they don't follow it, it's like you're never gonna win. And I think we practice a lot of frustrating games, if you will. And I think the frustrating games during the meaty part of the season help when we pivot to the really like pressure packed games like Set the Bar and Slip and Slide at the end of the season. But I do love those 2 because you can see kind of the anxiety, but also the excitement of getting to that point or winning. Winning the game is just like amazing to me. So I think we've done those. The players know them now. They might like if we introduce them back in this coming August, it'll be kind of like okay.
I remember that.
I remember that. Like we need to do this. The freshmen obviously will have like no idea what's going on, and their upperclassmen will be like, you have to get this point right.
Yeah,
but I think we've done a couple things like that. We do a good amount of pressure kind of serving things because I think that you don't want to change your routine because it's set point or match point. Like we try to get them to really instill in the serving because it's a closed skill instead of an open skill. You try to get them to really hone in like it's exactly the same. 24 is the same as 14
right.
in the process you're going to take.
It's just a number.
In a lot of athletes' mind, it is 100% different.
Yes, I agree. I have two examples that I really like. There's a game. It's both to work on the pressure and also on how can you come back when you're down, right? That helps you. I have one that the game is up to 11 points or either 6 kills or 2 blocks. Whatever you get first, you win. So maybe the game is 10-1, but that 1 point that the team got was a block. So if they get another block, they win the game, right?
That's
so
good.
They're down by 9 points. It's match point to the other team, but it's also match point to them if they get that extra block. So it's a way to keep them engaged, even if they think that the set is lost, they can still come back. So that's
good.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yes, there's another one that's fun too. We get a deck of cards, and the players draw a card, and that card is their score. So maybe they got a 10. Let's say we played to 10. The one team got an 8, and the other team got a 2. So the scores start like that, 8-2. So now, how do you come back from that score? You have to deal with it.
That's good. I like that. I just think there's so many good games out there. And I think this goes back to not being afraid to ask other coaches for things.
What they do, yes.
What they do, because I would love, I wouldn't have known Set the Bar that Pittsburgh was doing this, and they're pretty clutch. Like, they've won the ACC 2 years in a row. So I'm like, clearly that's a good game. It works, but I wouldn't have just known that because that wasn't in my bag of tricks. And so I think, like, asking other coaches about what they do in pressure situations, everybody's going to have something
different. Yeah.
Something different, for sure.
Yes, and I don't think anybody creates anything. Everybody copies something from another coach. So it's just, you're just passing around. There's nothing wrong with asking and trying to learn different drills and techniques and things like that. So I think it's important.
Yeah, I think it's even like we were lucky enough that last spring we took a staff trip to Stanford after they had won the national championship, and Kevin Hambley was so great. Anything we wanted, we were in on every meeting, every practice. We were there for 5 days, and it was totally fine. And literally, a lot of great coaches have no problem sharing. Like, if you really want to ask, like, be polite, be genuine, like, and just understand that, like, everybody has their stuff. And, it was interesting to me because Kevin and at the time Denise was still there, and they were asking us questions like, what do you do in your gym? And, I always think like, well, what do I do in my gym? You're Stanford.
Right. Why are you asking me?
But they're just as interested. Like they're interested and they know. And I think that that's what's so fun. And I think taking the opportunity to go into other people's gyms is really nice. And we've had people come into our gym. We were supposed to, before COVID, go to Michigan and stay with them and see what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's so many coaches are so welcoming to just, here's what I do. This is what we have. And not being nervous about asking people for it, because the more conversation, the better. Coaches love talking.
Absolutely. And they love to show how well they're doing. So if they have the opportunity to tell you that this gym is awesome, they will. Absolutely. It's always great to tell people what we're doing and how well it's going for us. Yeah. Exactly. This is great. I think after the preseason, in-season, and post-season practice planning, we're ready to win that championship. Totally. I mean, no matter what, planning should be, you got to be specific. You got to really care about it. You got to take the interest of the athletes at heart. And there's no such thing, honestly, as over planning. I just don't think that's, you can't over plan. You can't figure out backups and alternatives and things like that. And so I think, you're on the course to win a championship, whether national, regional, conference. If you just plan well and you get the kids bought into what you're doing, I think that's what's fun. And making sure that you collaborate, even if you don't have another staff member. Just asking other coaches for drills is the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yes, and even if you don't have another coach, again, I'm going to go back to my example in my junior college. My head coach always asked us players to help her. Maybe we were seeing something that she wasn't, so that communication between coaches and players, if you don't have an assistant, can be beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think, too, it's funny, at Dartmouth, so we're talking high academic achievers, we always had issues, which now I've grown to appreciate, was that I would explain a drill and they, in their very smart brains, would try to outsmart the drill, which was great because it led to making adjustments in drills because they would point out flaws or ways to make it better. And I think that always is a good thing, like not always getting feedback from the players, but I think it can be really helpful sometimes when you look back during the season. And we actually, in our end of the season meetings, sometimes we'll ask, like, what did you love doing in practice? What, like, was there a drill you loved and things like that? Would you change anything? Because it's always kind of great to get that feedback, because we're not in the drill. Exactly. We're running the drill, but we're not in it. So I think it's important, definitely, like what your coach was doing at your JUCO was smart to get that feedback and ask, because you all were coming from all over the country and you all had different experiences and different coaches. So why not tap into that?
Yeah, just to see a different perspective, it might help you when you're planning your practice.
For sure.
Yes. So, Aileen, thank you so much for being here. It was great talking to you. I hope quarantine is treating you well.
Thank you. And let's just hope that everything goes smoothly. And yeah, thanks for letting me come on. This was awesome. I love NVBA. So yeah, good times.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.
No problem.